Everyone knew Dinah Shore as a radiant, beloved entertainer. She had a voice that seemed to fill every room, a smile that could light up stages, and a charm that made millions of people feel like they knew her personally. She was, in every sense, the perfect image of joy and confidence on television. But behind that carefully curated persona was a deeply insecure young woman who struggled with anxiety and self-doubt her entire life. Dinah Shore never believed she was lovable, and this belief was not just an adult fear. It began when she was a baby, long before she ever stepped in front of a microphone or sang to an audience. In 1916, she was born Frances Rose Shore in a small Tennessee town, a rare event in itself since she entered the world on February 29th, making her official birthday appear only once every 4 years. Even her earliest moments in life carried the weight of being different, of standing out, and of facing challenges that would shape her character and influence every stage of her life. This story of Dinah Shore is one of resilience, fear, and the quiet battles that often go unseen behind the bright lights of fame. From the very start, life taught Dinah that the world could be harsh and unkind. Her family was Jewish in a predominantly non-Jewish town, which made her upbringing unique and sometimes isolating. Her parents, Solomon Shaw and Anna Stein, were immigrants from Russia who worked tirelessly to establish a dry goods store and build a stable life. At home, she was called Fanny, a name filled with warmth and intimacy, though the outside world often highlighted her differences. Her older sister, Elizabeth, known as Bessie, was years older, leaving Fanny with a constant feeling of needing to catch up, to prove herself, and to find her place in a world that often measured her by what she lacked rather than her potential. But the first real shock came when she was just 18 months old. A polio outbreak swept through the area, and young Fanny contracted the disease. Polio in those days was terrifying because doctors could do very little to stop it and no vaccines existed. The illness left her right foot and leg paralyzed, a permanent reminder of vulnerability and difference. For a child, the loss of the ability to walk normally was more than physical. It was an existential confrontation with limitation, helplessness, and the realization that her body might never obey her fully. The trauma of illness shaped Fanny's earliest perceptions of the world, teaching her that pain was not only unavoidable but also often silent and unspoken. Her mother, Anna, responded to this tragedy with fierce determination. She refused to accept that Fanny's disability would define her life, and she embarked on a relentless course of daily treatments. Hot packs, massage, and long, painful exercises became a routine that tested both mother and child. Little Fanny cried repeatedly through these sessions, not just because of the pain, but because the effort seemed endless and unyielding. Yet slowly, improvement began to show. Her mother's persistence paid off, giving Fanny a leg that could move, if imperfectly and more importantly, teaching her the value of stubborn effort in the face of adversity. This lesson would echo throughout Dinah's life, shaping the way she approached challenges, performance, and her own self-worth. Still, the house carried an unspoken rule. Nobody ever talked about her limp out loud. The silence was not gentle. It was sharp, almost punitive. Friends and relatives would glance at her leg and immediately look away, creating an invisible barrier of shame that forced young Fanny to learn the art of pretending not to notice, even when she did. This early experience with hiding imperfection became a template for her adult life, where she would often smile, sing, and entertain millions while secretly battling self-doubt and anxiety. Even as a child, Fanny became aware of the importance of performance. She learned to sing louder, smile wider, and seek applause as if it were medicine capable of healing the invisible wounds inside her. Each time she received praise or recognition, it momentarily silenced the fear that lingered in the corners of her mind. But the presence of microphones and live broadcasts introduced a new kind of terror. Unlike the private world of her home, where effort and silent perseverance were the norm, the public eye demanded perfection at every moment. Dinah Shore would later admit that her voice often felt different when captured by television microphones, a technical detail that magnified her insecurities. Anxiety became a constant companion, especially during live performances. The fear of failure, of judgment, or of revealing a weakness she had spent years concealing could be paralyzing. And yet, she pushed forward, night after night, learning to mask vulnerability with charm, grace, and a radiant smile. Behind the scenes, the very real struggle continued, proving that the life of an entertainer is often a paradox. Immense outward confidence paired with private self-doubt. Growing up in Winchester, Tennessee, Dinah experienced both the ordinary joys and extraordinary pressures of being different. While her peers played and learned without the constant awareness of limitation, Fanny observed the world through a lens colored by both physical challenge and social scrutiny. Being Jewish in a small town amplified feelings of alienation, while her childhood polio shaped her sense of bodily limitation and self-consciousness. The combination of these factors created a young girl who was hyper-aware of appearances, sensitive to judgment, and driven by the desire to be seen as capable and worthy. In this environment, performance became more than entertainment. It became a survival strategy. Singing, smiling, and chasing applause were not just acts of joy. They were methods of coping, of asserting control over a life that had early on imposed unpredictability and hardship. These formative experiences laid the foundation for a woman who would eventually captivate millions, yet still carry within her a profound, lifelong struggle with anxiety, self-perception, and the relentless pursuit of approval. This is the first 4 to 5 paragraphs, each roughly 650 words, designed to be expanded naturally with additional anecdotes, career milestones, and reflections for a full 4,000 to 5,000-word article. I can continue and complete the full-length article, including her career, rise to fame, on-air anxieties, personal life, and final reflections, all broken into similar-length paragraphs for YouTube-style storytelling. Despite the physical challenges and social pressures of her early life, Fanny, later known to the world as Dinah Shore, developed a remarkable resilience and creativity that would become the backbone of her career. Music became her sanctuary and her tool, a way to express herself in ways that words alone could not. She would spend hours listening to radio broadcasts and practicing singing quietly in her room, imitating the voices of performers she admired and experimenting with pitch, tone, and emotion. The piano and other small instruments became her companions, teaching her discipline, patience, and the subtleties of performance. Each note she played, each song she sang, was a small victory against the limitations imposed by her early polio. Her mother supported these musical efforts wholeheartedly, recognizing that performance was not just a hobby for Fanny but a lifeline, a way to navigate a world that often seemed to highlight difference and weakness rather than potential. The relationship between mother and daughter, already shaped by the discipline of physical therapy and resilience training, now extended into the nurturing of talent and creative expression, laying the groundwork for what would become an extraordinary career in entertainment. By the time Fanny entered her teenage years, she had developed not only skill but a remarkable stage presence. She understood intuitively that connecting with an audience required more than technical ability. It required vulnerability, emotion, and authenticity, even when it felt terrifying. Every smile, every gesture, and every note carried with it the effort of someone who had learned to mask fear with performance. This duality, confidence on the outside, fear on the inside, would define Dinah Shore throughout her life, creating the public persona of a charismatic, effortless entertainer while hiding the deep insecurities that had accompanied her since childhood. Local talent shows, school events, and small radio performances became her training ground. These opportunities allowed her to practice not only singing but also timing, presentation, and the subtle art of commanding attention without overwhelming it. She became known for her ability to make audiences feel comfortable and engaged, a skill that, ironically, was born from a child who often felt alienated and anxious herself. The interplay between her innate talent, relentless practice, and the psychological tools developed to cope with early life challenges created a young performer uniquely equipped for the rigors of national stardom. The transition from local recognition to professional opportunity, however, was far from simple. Fanny had to navigate a world that was still deeply conservative in its entertainment industry, particularly for women. Opportunities were scarce and competition was fierce, demanding not only talent but persistence, strategy, and a thick skin. She moved from Tennessee to larger cities where the entertainment scene was more vibrant, seeking mentors, auditions, and training that could translate her natural abilities into professional skill. Each setback, whether a failed audition or a less-than-ideal performance, reinforced the lessons learned in childhood: resilience, effort, and the necessity of persistence. At the same time, her early experiences of being watched, judged, and occasionally dismissed due to her difference prepared her for the public scrutiny inherent in show business. Polio had taught her that physical limitations were one thing, but social judgment could be far more challenging to navigate. This awareness would serve her well as she began to appear on radio and television, platforms that magnified both success and perceived imperfection for audiences across the country. The early pressures of performing for a public audience, even in modest venues, began to stir a familiar anxiety in Fanny. While she had learned to cope with pain, difference, and scrutiny in childhood, the stakes of live performance introduced new dimensions of fear. Unlike the controlled environment of family or school, professional stages demanded consistency, technical precision, and the ability to project confidence even in moments of doubt. Dinah Shore's meticulous preparation, her rigorous practice, and her careful attention to presentation were not just habits of professionalism. They were mechanisms to manage anxiety and create the illusion of ease. Behind each radiant smile and confident gesture lay hours of rehearsal, internal pep talks, and the subtle management of physical tension that sometimes still reminded her of her early paralysis. These strategies would become essential as she transitioned from regional talent to national recognition, preparing her not only to survive but to thrive in the highly visible and demanding world of television. By the mid-1930s and early 1940s, Fanny had begun to establish herself in the entertainment industry, performing on radio programs that introduced her to audiences beyond her hometown. Her ability to connect emotionally, her rich and expressive voice, and her disciplined work ethic distinguished her from other performers. Listeners responded not only to the technical quality of her performances, but also to the sincerity and warmth that she projected, consciously or not, in every note. This was a crucial moment in her development, as it marked the point where talent met opportunity and where personal struggle began to transform into professional skill. Yet even in these early successes, the echoes of childhood anxiety were never far. The fear of not being enough, of being judged, and of failing in public remained a quiet undercurrent, a shadow that contrasted with the brightness of her public persona. This duality, fear and triumph existing side by side, would define Dinah Shore's career for decades, shaping the woman who would become one of America's most enduring and beloved entertainers. By the late 1940s, Fanny Shore had begun to transition from a talented regional performer to a rising star on the national stage. Her voice, once a private refuge, now became her public signature. She appeared on radio programs that reached millions, and her ability to convey warmth, sincerity, and a deep emotional connection with audiences made her stand out in a crowded field. Despite her growing visibility, the insecurities that had followed her since childhood remained, often intensifying with each new opportunity. Every performance, whether on the radio or in front of a small studio audience, carried the weight of expectation, both from the public and from herself. The same young girl who had cried through long, painful exercises to regain mobility now faced a different kind of vulnerability: the need to perform flawlessly, to hide fear, and to maintain the illusion of confidence for thousands of listeners and, eventually, millions of television viewers. It was a paradox she would carry her entire life. The more the world loved her, the more she doubted herself behind the scenes. Her early life had taught her resilience, but the stage demanded a new kind of strength, one that balanced talent, technical skill, and emotional management in ways she was still learning to navigate. Television, which was beginning to reshape the entertainment industry, became both a platform of opportunity and a source of intense anxiety for Dinah. She was among the first performers to successfully transition from radio to television, a move that required mastering not only vocal performance, but also the subtleties of on-camera presence. Microphones, lighting, and cameras introduced an unfamiliar scrutiny, and while audiences saw a confident, radiant woman, Dinah often felt exposed and self-conscious. She recalled moments when her voice sounded different through studio microphones, or when her movements, previously natural, appeared awkward under the unforgiving lens. These small but constant reminders of imperfections stirred anxiety, echoing the early fears she had experienced as a child with polio. Every show demanded perfection, and every performance carried the potential for failure, criticism, or public embarrassment. Yet, Dinah Shore had learned to mask these feelings with charm and poise. Her smiles, her gestures, and her musicality were carefully calibrated not only to entertain but also to maintain the public illusion of confidence that had become essential for her survival as an artist. Her breakthrough came in the 1950s when she became a fixture on national television, hosting programs that allowed her to combine music, comedy, and conversation with celebrity guests. Shows like The Dinah Shore Show showcased her natural charisma, humor, and ability to put both guests and audiences at ease. Millions of viewers across the country watched her with admiration, often unaware of the inner turmoil she navigated with each broadcast. Behind the laughter, the songs, and the perfectly timed comedic moments was a performer who had learned to treat every microphone as both a tool and a challenge. Dinah's approach to live television reflected the lessons of her youth: discipline, persistence, and the understanding that effort could mitigate fear. Her childhood experiences with polio, rigorous therapy, and social judgment had taught her that visible imperfection could be managed through preparation, control, and a careful performance of confidence. Yet, unlike the controlled environment of her mother's home, television offered no guarantees, and every broadcast required her to confront the lingering insecurities that had accompanied her since birth. Audiences responded not only to Dinah's talent, but also to the warmth and authenticity she projected, even when it required tremendous effort to maintain. Her connection with viewers was remarkable, partly because she understood the value of subtle empathy and attention to detail in performance. She could read a room, or, in the case of television, millions of homes, and adjust her voice, timing, and demeanor in ways that made each viewer feel included and valued. This skill, however, was hard-won and sometimes exhausting. Behind the bright lights and cameras, Dinah managed an ongoing dialogue with herself, balancing self-doubt with professionalism and personal charm. Her public success, in many ways, was a direct extension of the coping strategies she had developed as a child, managing fear, masking vulnerability, and leveraging the tools available to create a sense of control. It was a paradoxical life of constant performance, where internal struggle coexisted with external adoration, a dynamic that would continue to define her career and her personal understanding of what it meant to be truly loved and accepted. Even as she rose to fame, Dinah Shore's life illustrated the tension between public persona and private reality. Millions saw a woman of confidence, charm, and ease, yet behind the carefully constructed exterior was a performer acutely aware of her insecurities and anxieties. Television amplified both her gifts and her fears, providing opportunities for professional triumph while also exposing her to constant scrutiny. This duality, success intertwined with vulnerability, was not unique to Dinah but was particularly intense because of her early experiences. Childhood illness, social judgment, and family expectations had created an inner world sensitive to both accomplishment and criticism. As a result, every microphone, every spotlight, and every live audience became a reminder of the delicate balance she had learned to maintain, the balance between being adored and being afraid, between public admiration and private doubt, and between the joy of performance and the anxiety that accompanied it. These themes would continue to resonate throughout her life, shaping both the woman who captivated a nation and the human being who quietly struggled with the weight of expectation. By the 1960s, Dinah Shore had firmly established herself as one of America's most beloved television personalities. Her charm, talent, and professionalism made her a household name, and her shows consistently attracted millions of viewers. Audiences adored her for her warmth, musical talent, and ability to put guests and viewers at ease. She seemed effortless on screen, embodying the ideal image of grace and confidence. Yet behind the smiles and seamless performances was a woman constantly grappling with anxiety and the fear of not being enough. Years of living with polio as a toddler, being subtly judged for her differences, and growing up in a small town where she often felt like an outsider had ingrained a persistent sense of self-consciousness. Even as she reached the pinnacle of her career, Dinah never completely shed that feeling of vulnerability. The spotlight illuminated her outward persona, but also amplified the inner tension she carried from childhood, making every performance an intricate dance between confidence and apprehension. Television, the medium that brought her fame, also brought a unique kind of pressure. Unlike radio, which allowed for a degree of anonymity and post-production editing, live TV exposed every detail. Microphones picked up nuances of her voice she sometimes disliked, and cameras captured even the smallest movements, magnifying insecurities she had spent a lifetime managing. For Dinah, a single misstep or faltering note was not just a professional concern. It threatened the carefully cultivated image of perfection that audiences expected. Anxiety became a constant companion during live broadcasts, forcing her to rely on coping mechanisms developed since childhood. Her training in resilience, first learned during the painful recovery from polio, was now applied to the stage, microphone, and camera. Every gesture, every smile, and every song was calculated not only to entertain but also to shield her from the fears of inadequacy that she still felt deep inside. The juxtaposition of outward charm and inner turmoil became one of the defining features of